I am live. We're here now. I'm not a cat. Oh man, that was a good meme. Hello, welcome, one and all, to the Brothers Discuss. We are the Brothers Galucky. I am Alex.
And I am Chris.
And today we are beginning our MCU marathon. We're going to discuss each film of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and just chat about them and do a sort of like retrospective on them, I suppose, a recap. Because a large part of why we're doing this is because we're, at the time recording this, we are one episode left of WandaVision, and we're both really, really enjoying it so far. And yeah, we just kind of wanted to just look back at all the films beforehand. Maybe touch on TV shows every once in a while, like maybe some Daredevil, for sure. We'll see. But today, for this podcast, we are going to be talking about the film that started it all. That is 2008's Iron Man. Yeah, so I guess a quick little history lesson before we get started here. So, yeah, superhero movies were kind of hit or miss prior to this. Like, I think 1978, we saw the release of Richard Donner's Superman, which was inspired by the huge boom in the fantasy genre in the wake of Star Wars. And since then, there have been the odd, like, Superman, Batman films that came out in the 90s. We got a little more variety. There was, like, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Dick Tracy, not Dick, I don't know what I was saying. Dick Tracy, The Crow, The Punisher, and stuff like that. But then we also hit rock bottom in terms of quality. Flops like, Steel and two films that never even got a theatrical release, Captain America and the Fantastic Four, which all, of course, culminated with Joe Schumacher's Batman and Robin in 1997. And it was at that point, many considered the superhero subgenre to be dead. And you couldn't get any worse than that. At least that was the audience perception. So after a brief silence, Blade was released, which sparked audience interest in comic movies before Bryan Singer's X-Men and Sam Raimi's Spider-Man blew the doors open for a new resurgence of superhero comic films. And, we had old favorites return, such as Superman, Batman, and The Punisher. And new heroes joined the revolution thanks to the advance of CGI and improved technology like Hellboy, Ghost Rider, the Fantastic Four, for real this time, kind of. And 2008 is kind of considered the year where superhero movies reached their peak and evolved even further with Iron Man and The Dark Knight.
Yeah.
So for the purposes of this discussion, we're only going to be talking about Iron Man. So how did Marvel Studios come about? Well, in the 90s, it didn't suck for comic book movies. It sucked for comic books. During the 90s, Marvel famously filed for bankruptcy due to the sales of low-quality books. And to try and sustain themselves financially, they sold the film rights to various film studios. Spider-Man and Ghost Rider went to Sony, X-Men, Fantastic Four, and Daredevil went to Fox, the Hulk went to Universal, the Punisher went to Lionsgate, so on. It was a huge mess. So by 2004, comic book movies were becoming the biggest thing on the planet, so that led to Marvel opening their own studio with a few characters and rights they had left. So this led to an interesting dilemma for Marvel. The big names belonged to other studios like Spider-Man, Wolverine, the X-Men, and they were arguably getting bigger thanks to those films. So Marvel had to make films for their second-tier heroes, which at the time, of course, those would be like Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor. And the Hulk was probably the best well-known hero that they had attained the rights to after Ang Lee's Hulk didn't do too well for Universal in 2003. Have you ever seen that movie, the 2003 Hulk movie?
I haven't, actually.
It is something else. And, of course, the first character they made a movie for under the Marvel Studios banner was, obviously, Iron Man, where they acquired the rights from New Line Cinema, who, and that the thing with this Iron Man film is that there were attempts to make an Iron Man film as far back as 1990. They tried to get an Iron Man movie made back then. It was originally going to be directed by, wait for it, Joss Whedon.
Oh.
Yeah, that was back in like 2000. By 2006, they were initially looking to get a release by 2006, but that obviously never happened. But little did we know that 2008's Iron Man was the start of something great, just a taste of things to come. And now we're currently 23 films in this massive saga with still more movies and shows to come. But I guess now let's talk about where it all began.
Yeah.
So Iron Man, like I said, it was attempted to be made since as early as 1990, where at that point Universal Studios had the rights. And there were talks of Nick Cage and Tom Cruise for the role of Tony Stark. And at one point, Quentin Tarantino was in talks of directing. And that never happened, obviously. And like I alluded to earlier, New Line Cinema tried to get it made with Joss Whedon to direct it, but obviously that never came through. So what happened then was Marvel then acquired the rights back to Iron Man, and they started completely from scratch. So the movie we ended up with did not actually have a finished script, and I guess we'll talk about that in a bit. So there's a lot going on with this film, and I guess we should probably talk about the opening.
Yes. I love, love, love the opening to this movie. It sets up Tony's character like so perfectly, like how he is at the start of the film, this kind of self-obsessed douchebag in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And it also sets up the Jon Favreau style in the two films, which it's abandoned in the third one, sadly. Having all this, having Tony's music, Tony's attitude, and it feels
AC/DC.
very yes, and it has that Jon Favreau touch to it, but it sets up Tony's internal struggle like just so great, and how to become a better man, not be this self-obsessed, selfish douchebag.
Yeah. It's a brilliant start to the film. Originally in the comics, Tony Stark originally got injured and was held captive in Vietnam. But now that the story has been brought forward to this contemporary setting, it's in this opening that we get to see the laid back, egotistical nature of his character. It's just such a brilliant introduction. And I guess while we're talking about this scene, we should mention the convoy attack. It's pretty intense stuff, and it doesn't pull any punches. It's hardly Saving Private Ryan by any means, but it puts you in the heart of the conflict, and it is effective.
Yeah.
And we then flash back to 36 hours earlier, and we see what his life is like. And one thing is obvious. We want to be him.
Yes.
Seriously, like, how awesome is this lifestyle? Like a huge house overlooking the ocean, gorgeous cars, gorgeous women, a personal jet surrounded by futuristic technology and lots of money. Like, you want to be Tony Stark, and you are envious of his wealth. It's hard not to be captivated by his, like, I'm too cool to care attitude. And he's funny, quick-witted, and he's fiercely intelligent.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I guess the other interesting thing to point out about this film as well is that, like, don't be fooled by the PG-13 rating. Like, this is not a film that kids are going to fully understand. I mean, they might get the broad strokes, but this is a superhero movie about business. The hero is a businessman. The villain is a businessman. The love interest is a personal assistant. The motivations revolve around economics, money, and stocks. However, as is par for the course for the superhero origin story, Iron Man isn't about the plot, but rather it's about the characters and how they evolve. And on that level, I think this film succeeds admirably.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And the interesting to me about this movie, which I guess separates it from any previous superhero origin story at the time, is that Tony Stark gained his suit through sheer necessity as opposed to chance or luck. Like, if I can make some comparisons, Peter Parker just happened to get bitten by a spider. Bruce Wayne chose to become a figure of darkness after the death of his parents. The Fantastic Four got into an accident, and Superman's fate was sealed as a baby, basically. And while Tony is held hostage by the Ten Rings, he and Jensen build a suit of armor so he can survive and escape, as well as prevent his captors from using his own weapons against him and for others. And in 2008, that was a very unique origin story, and it still kind of is over 10 years later.
Yeah.
And since the origin takes place in the first act, it means that Iron Man is an engaging and unique movie right out of the gate. And it just has one of the most compelling leads in recent memory. Robert Downey Jr., like, as Tony Stark, is a joy to watch.
Absolutely.
And yes, Jon Favreau has gone on record to say that he chose to cast Robert Downey Jr. because of his personal demons at the time, and his personal problems in his life shared many similarities with Tony Stark.
Yeah.
2008 was
this big comeback for him.
Yes, exactly. 2008 really was his year in terms of career comebacks, and not just for this performance, but for his incredible performance as Kirk Lazarus in the Ben Stiller comedy Tropic Thunder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and that's when he was nominated for an Oscar, right?
Yes. People often forget this, but he was nominated for Best Supporting Actor at the Oscars that year, but he lost to Heath Ledger's Joker performance in The Dark Knight. And now you remember.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, Iron Man is a well-assembled and well-made action movie, but the lead performance is just, to me, it makes this film and elevate it to something truly special and noteworthy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of that comes down to Robert Downey Jr.'s chemistry with the rest of the cast. Just the way they talk to each other, you get the sense that they have a history and a long-standing relationship with each other. And I mean, it's a testament to the actors and Jon Favreau's ability to direct and work with them. And most of the dialogue feels natural, improvised, and that's actually because it actually is. Mm-hmm. Iron Man famously went into production without a finished script. So the actors would make up most of their exchanges on the fly. And Robert Downey Jr. would always add something new to each take and would always write many of the scripted segments himself. That includes his Jericho speech. That was written entirely by Downey.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah, I know. And I would love to genuinely see what the finished script looked like, because and compare it to what was filmed and edited into the final product. I mean, and this makes it a bit hard for me to give props to the writers, because if you look in the credits, there are 4 of them credited in the end. But I don't know who wrote what and what was improvised. But either way, the dialogue in this movie is simply great, because Tony Stark is such a big personality. It would have been easy for him to wear out his welcome and become annoying, but it's a very smart portrayal by Robert. And he and the writers know just when to reel back the character and prevent him from becoming too unlikable or too obnoxious. It also helps that Robert is a very capable actor and dramatic actor. His story arc feels believable, and it's mainly due to his performance. And huge kudos to Robert for being able to sell such a transformation.
Yes.
Anything in particular you want to touch on right now?
Basically everything you just said right there. I love Downey's performance. I completely agree with you on, like, you know, whenever, especially in the first act, whenever there's a line delivered between Downey and another character, you could tell their history. Like, from the first line that Tony has with Rhodey, you could tell right off the bat, these are 2 best friends. The first line between Tony and Pepper, you can tell right off the bat, this is, you know, it's not just Tony's assistant, but it's the love interest. It's a will they, won't they kind of thing going on with that relationship. Tony and Obadiah, it's big history there. Left with a lot of uncertainty, because we kind of know where Tony gets off with Obadiah, but we don't really know where Obadiah gets off with Tony at the start of the film.
Yeah.
For
sure.
Yeah.
And despite the title of the movie being Iron Man, the movie isn't about Iron Man. It's about the man inside the suit.
Yeah.
And the character's sense of progression during the second act is possibly the best portion of the movie for me, as he tries out, you know, new technology, he tests out the suit, he goes on his first flight, and there's a great sense of fun to these proceedings. And while there are some big laughs to be had, it never descends into self-parody, which I think is really, really good. And it's also during these segments that we learn more about Tony's relationship with his machines and the way he interacts with them. It's fun and charming at the same time. And of course, we also have the introduction of Paul Bettany as Jarvis, who would basically be a main player throughout the MCU, whether he's Jarvis or Vision. Yeah. And I'm sure many have pointed this out as well, but Paul Bettany was basically in each start of each phase. You know, obviously phase 1 starts with Iron Man. Phase 2 started with Iron Man 3. Phase 3 started with Civil War. You see Vision again. And phase 4 technically started with WandaVision.
Yeah, that's neat.
So, yeah, that's an interesting little tidbit about Paul Bettany. It all started here as just a voice role.
Yeah. Um, touching on to the second act, I gotta say, like when I rewatched this the other day, and just seeing like his first, actual flights, where not just like the escape flight from the cave, but like his first test run, his first flight, it's just so magical. I mean, it's such a joyride because you feel like you're actually with him. You feel like you're up in the sky. You're uh like a little kid just jumping up and down for joy and just having such
You're
a
like the kid
blast.
that drops his ice cream.
Yeah, yeah, and you're just having like just such a blast, like flying around the city, and it's that's something that like this movie just does so perfectly. Is just capturing that atmosphere of an origin, is getting to kind of experience what the hero's going through, and that scene in particular is just so perfectly well done for that.
Yeah, like there's such a huge like underdog spirit with the film. If you watch like behind the scenes stuff of this film, and John Favreau often talks about like, oh, like this is here's a movie that we're gonna try out. We have no idea if it's gonna work or not, but we're all having a really good time making it. Like there's just such an earnest underdog spirit that Marvel just does not really have anymore. Not that they really need it, of course, because they're now the most successful movie franchise of all time.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, what else was I going to touch on? So Robert Downey Jr., I guess just real quick, his delivery on the jokes are also played straight, which really adds to the comedy factor. And it really feels like he's making up these quips on the fly instead of them being scripted. And again, that's just a testament to how good he is at improvising.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess as for the supporting cast, I guess let's talk about Gwyneth Paltrow's Pepper Potts, Tony's personal assistant. Let's talk about her.
All right.
So when compared to other comic movie love interests, she initially doesn't do a whole lot to stand out, but as the movie progresses, she becomes more and more interesting, and she's unique in that she's a friend to the titular character, but she's also an employee. And in a way, she and Tony are forced to be best friends because they don't really have anybody else. And that's a relationship I find very interesting. And she also discovers Tony's alter ego pretty early in the movie, which is surprising because, again, in comparison to most, though not all superhero movies, the love interest either never finds out the secret identity or discovers it in the sequel. And I give props to the filmmakers for not playing all the cards too early, as Tony and Pepper aren't even a proper couple in the end, at least not in the conventional sense. Paltrow settles into the role very naturally and sells the by the book assistant role very nicely, while also throwing in a little bit of self-confidence in there.
Yeah. And you also have to think, this is, by the time this movie came out, it's like love interests in comic book movies, if they didn't have superpowers, like 95% of the time they were a damsel in distress. And this like kind of has that towards the third act, but it's not like, big. It's like that's the main objective or anything. So this is kind of a big step forward for superhero movies, was to have this very different take on the, hero's relationship.
Yeah, but her on-screen relationship with Robert Downey Jr. is so enjoyable to watch as she plays the grounded role to his eccentric personality. It's good casting. Yeah. And as for other supporting characters, let's see. I mean, we have James Rhodes, Rhodey, played in this movie by Terrence Howard.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Terrence Howard. How do you feel about him in this movie compared to Don Cheadle?
He's got a lot of energy in this movie. And this is like the only movie that Rhodey's in where, he's not in a suit. He's not, flying around and being part of the action or anything. He's like just mostly, doing military stuff. He's, behind the scenes and everything. But
yeah,
he's so much energy with Rhodey. And every time I watch a Marvel movie and Rhodey's in there and Don Cheadle, I always like try to picture, okay, what if in the hypothetical world, like this was like Terrence Howard went from Iron Man to Endgame, and I try to picture like all scenes, like when he gets paralyzed in Civil War, like what if that was Terrence Howard? Or it's really different to think about because Don Cheadle definitely plays the more serious Rhodey, like that's goes without saying.
Yeah.
So for this film, I think I that casting decision really works because this movie has a lot of energy, and he just adds on to it. So I think he was a good decision for this film. But as for going like into the future in Marvel movies, I mean, I'd be optimistic. I mean, but I still
Yeah,
think
or maybe even if, like, let's say hypothetically, like this, they make the special edition for Iron Man and replace Terrence Howard with Don Cheadle. I legit thought of this the other day, actually. What if they did that? Maybe they, I mean, we'll talk about Incredible Hulk as well, but what if they brought in Mark Ruffalo for that film? Just just
that'd
replace
be
Edward
weird.
Norton. That would be
Replace
super weird.
the lead actor of the film.
Can it be done? Who knows? But well, that's a discussion for an Incredible Hulk for our next
Yeah.
one. But as for, yeah, Terrence Howard, I think he's great. I mean, it is awkward watching that movie. He gets the line like, "Next time, baby." It's like, ooh, yeah, that's awkward. Um, but no, like, I mean, they do work really well together. Him and Robert Downey Jr. And you get the sense
Yeah.
that they do have a history and they hold a great amount of respect for one another. There's a sense of camaraderie, and the ad-libbing of the actors helps to get that across for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, with a great hero, you need a great villain. And thankfully, we have a pretty good villain in the form of Obadiah Stane, played by Jeff Bridges. And
I mean,
I have a weird set of, yeah.
Just
go
the
on.
fact that it's Jeff Bridges automatically like just bumps this villain up. Like if I had a list of, all of the villains in the MCU ranked, he's probably in the top 10 just because he's Jeff Bridges.
Yeah.
I love
I
it.
have a weird set of feelings about Jeff Bridges in this movie. And, when I first saw this, I really loved him in it. But then a few months later, I saw The Dark Knight. And I forgot all about him after Heath Ledger's portrayal of the Joker.
Yeah.
And I mean, no matter what happens, you're always going to look bad when compared to Heath Ledger's Joker. Then,
Yeah.
when both these movies came out on DVD, I watched them both in relatively quick succession, and I really wasn't a fan of Obadiah. But after distancing myself from both movies and rewatching Iron Man for the purposes of this discussion,
Mm-hmm.
I can really appreciate the character, even though Iron Man: The Dark Knight came out in the same year and even in the same season. I won't even begin comparing Heath Ledger's Joker to Jeff Bridges' Obadiah Stane.
No.
That just would not be fair. But what makes Obadiah work is the context of the film he is in. He's quite fleshed out as a character, and I'm surprised Bridges was able to balance the two main elements that make him work. In the first half of the movie, he has to be a long-standing business partner trying to help Tony and be a friend and maybe even a father figure. But then in the second half, he's trying to kill him with an enhanced version of the Iron Man suit to take control of his company. Boy, that escalated quickly.
Yeah.
Not many actors can make that work, but Bridges does it, and he does it well. When I first saw the movie, I knew very little about the Iron Man comics, so I didn't know much about the character or his rogues gallery. So Obadiah's turn to villainy was kind of surprising to me. I remember that, and it's mainly because Jeff Bridges feels like an authentic, warm but stern father figure to Tony, but there is the occasional flash of an ulterior motive that helps make the twist feel organic and not come completely out of nowhere. Whether it's, the whole Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave, or what's another good one that I was trying to think of? I can't remember. I watched this the other day as well. But you get what I mean, though.
Yeah.
I find the support of Obadiah more interesting than the evil one in the second half, personally.
Yeah.
And especially after he spends a lot of his time gloating at Tony instead of, getting the job done, because that's basically what he does in that final fight.
Mm-hmm.
And when he becomes the Ironmonger in the end, it's kind of anticlimactic.
It
that's
is.
just
It's one of the more shorter fights in the MCU, and I think I could tell the reason why. It's because the focus was definitely more in the first half with his character, and in the second half they just needed to finish it off. They needed a final battle, and they put together a bigger Iron Man, and that was the final battle of that movie.
Which, of course, started the trend for many Marvel movies, the formula, really, of the villain getting pitted with a more powerful version of the suit or whatever.
Incredible Hulk does it. Iron Man 2 does
it. I mean, Thor and Loki they're both Norse gods. Captain America. I mean, like, Captain America is a super patriot. Red Skull is just pure evil. Let's see. I mean, Ant-Man does it.
Yeah.
Black Panther does it, though I think that's one of the better instances.
Mhm.
But we'll get into that.
That's because Killmonger's like basically sharing the main character role with Chadwick.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah, I guess I'm sure there's other examples I forgot about. Oh, Doctor Strange, of course.
Yeah.
Two sorcerers, but you know. As far as other characters, I mean, we've got our introduction of Clark Gregg as Agent Phil Coulson. This kind of bothers me. Why don't they realize that their organization spells out SHIELD? Don't they realize that it spells out?
It's supposed to be like that, like, ooh moment. It's like, oh, it's SHIELD.
Yeah, I know. But you do realize that's for SHIELD.
What bothers me even more, I mean, and this has nothing to do with Iron Man. This is way in the future of these podcasts, but in Captain Marvel, when SHIELD is actually called SHIELD, like Nick Fury directly says SHIELD.
Yeah,
that takes place in the 90s.
That does, yeah, I agree. That does bother me. But that is a problem with Captain Marvel, not Iron Man.
Yeah.
Who else? I mean, we also have Sean Tube as Jensen. He adds just so much heart, and I do genuinely feel sad when Jensen dies.
Oh yeah,
every time. Let's talk about the suit. The special effects in Iron Man were done by Industrial Light and Magic, who the year prior did the CGI for the first Michael Bay Transformers movie. So you can see why they were brought on to bring the technology in Tony Stark's world to life. And the emphasis of metallic and intricate machinery is something the company clearly specializes in. And the same strengths for their work on Transformers applies here. All the machinery feels like there's weight to it. You get the impression that there's a real force and mass interacting with everything on screen, even though most of it was done on a computer.
Yeah.
And there's also great use of motion capture as well. And the film definitely deserved its Academy Award nomination for visual effects. But the tiny details as well, like how Pepper was able to put her hand in Tony Stark's chest. And there's also Tony Stark's wonderfully detailed heads-up display in his Iron Man suit, which, seriously, there's a reason pretty much every movie with Iron Man has recycled that effect. But the Iron Man suits themselves look amazing.
Yeah. I love like his final suit of the film, the touch of red and gold. Looks so good. And it's not, it's not straight out of the comic book either, because I like the suit in Endgame, I feel like is the more comic book adapted suit. This one, modern touch, but has the same, colors and overall look of it.
Yeah, and what's great is that the effects are there to enhance the film as opposed to being blind spectacle.
Yeah.
There's also no rapid fire editing during the action sequences thanks to the pullback cameras, so you can look back and admire the scope, the effects, and the camera work. And but it's obvious the action takes a back seat in terms of focus. There are 3 action set pieces. They're short, but they're very sweet.
Yeah.
Are there 3 or are there 4?
Like that totally flew. And I think the second film also kind of follows that too. It's too many action sets, but
I'm trying to think. So there's Tony Stark's escape, him flying over. I guess you could count the planes as well as part of that same sequence, and then the final battle. And unless you count the very intro as an action set piece, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, you might get away with it, but I'd say like Tony Stark action, you only have the 3 set pieces.
Yeah. But as we alluded to earlier, the final battle, it's kind of anticlimactic, though I do appreciate the tension that's there when like Tony goes into the fight with very low power in his suit. So he's not quite a full power mode, whereas Ironmonger is at the top.
Yeah.
But then you see Tony try to find ways to take him down, and there's even points where he loses a bit of his armor, like the bit where he loses like one of his like glove pieces. And it's just like, oh, that's just Good stuff. That's how you build tension right there.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I guess the very ending as well
That
is
that's what
also that ending also flips superhero conventions on their heads by having
yeah.
Tony flat out reveal his identity.
It changed secret identities in films forever. Because I mean,
Mhm.
after from this point on in the MCU, it kind of built this world where secret identities don't really matter.
Yeah, exactly.
uh,
Even when you think it's supposed to matter in other films, we'll certainly talk about later. Uh, yeah, there aren't really secret identities in the films,
mhm.
and when there are, it's just like, so what? You know, I'm not trying to jump ahead to Spider-Man Far From Home already, but just know in advance that
we'll get there.
I am not a fan of
That's
Spider-Man,
gonna be
MCU Spider-Man.
that is gonna be a very, very big podcast.
Oh,
I'm
geez,
gonna
yeah.
write a 13-page essay at least on that.
Oh, wow. Um, but yeah, look forward to that when we talk about Iron Boy Jr. But yeah, the ending is just great because I think because after this movie came out, I did actually start to read more comics after this.
Mhm.
And for me, the excuses that Tony Stark always made always felt flimsy to me. Like, oh, like Iron Man is his protector, bodyguard, or whatever. It's like it's too obvious. The dude's Iron Man. So having him flat out reveal his identity, and it's great. It's different, and it just makes sense to me. It's just another ego push for Tony.
And even that, I like how it has that kind of touch, like the press asking, like, do you really expect us to believe like a bodyguard was in that suit? And
Yeah,
I like how it has that little touch to it.
yeah, exactly. And also the use of Black Sabbath in the credits, perfect.
Hmm.
And I guess while we're talking about music, the score by the criminally underrated Ramin Djawadi, I think is how you pronounce it. I have no idea how you pronounce his name. I'm going to butcher a lot of these names, by the way, but it's brilliant. The orchestrations mainly consist of bass and strings with a bit of metallic sound effects along with it,
Hmm.
along with some like straight up metal motifs for good measure. It feels justified for the character because Tony Stark likes to listen to like heavy metal and rock all the
Hmm.
time, so it fits that character.
Yeah, and I'm gonna mention the
Um,
holy scene again of his like first actual flight. I love the score in that scene too. It's
mhm.
very heroic and triumphant because it's is he's flying for the first time or second time technically, but like the first big time.
Yeah, where he's in control.
Yeah,
And yeah, I guess to wrap it up, you want to talk about the after credit scene?
there we go. The Avengers Initiative. Um,
Yes, we get our introduction to Samuel L. Jackson as Nick Fury, and even back then, like I knew what a big deal this was. Like um around that time, I was reading Ultimate Spider-Man, and in the Ultimate Universe, they based Nick Fury's likeness on Samuel L. Jackson. Like they had to ask him if they could use his likeness on their version of Nick Fury, and they did. And so seeing him actually play the character it's just perfect. Um, because any other time I saw Nick Fury and whether it was like cartoons or like the video game Spider-Man friend or foe, he was just this old white guy.
Project
Um,
Carnage.
yes. um, but yeah, and it's just a further tease of like stuff to come that they're gonna make something big. And I gotta be honest, when I watched this movie for the first time, I was 12 when this movie came out, and I could not even begin to fathom what an Avengers movie would look like yet. And I didn't, and I'll be
Hmm.
honest, I didn't even think it could be possible. But as we see later on, we saw that they were capable of it.
Yeah.
And as far as any other like major like Avengers Easter eggs in this film, there we do get Captain America's shield in one scene.
In
It's
this
just there in
movie?
the back. Yeah, in this movie, like when Pepper sees Iron Man, like Tony in the Iron Man suit for the first time, while like the machines are taking off the suit, You do see Cap's shield like sitting on a table in the background. It's the same shield as
that.
It's the same shield that Coulson has in Iron Man 2, where it's not quite fully complete. So that's there.
I've never noticed that for 13 years.
Really? Wow.
I've never noticed that.
Yeah, it's there. It's in the background. It's on a table, but it's there.
Wow.
And yeah, I guess I think that's all the big Avengers Easter eggs. And obviously we have a Stanley cameo.
Oh yeah.
As he does. But yeah, that about does it for me. You know, Iron Man, it's a unique superhero movie. It's got a flawed and intriguing anti-hero. It's just a great, fun watch. The writing is witty. And yeah, like I said, it just flips a lot of superhero conventions. It just, like I said, it just feels unique. And it's one of my favorites of the MCU. I feel it's a worthy watch. Like if for whatever reason, like you can only watch 10 movies of the MCU, you've never seen any of them. I would call Iron Man an essential film.
Mm-hmm.
One that you definitely have to watch for sure. What's your grade on this by any chance? On a scale of like 1 to 10, what would you give this?
I would probably, I don't really like doing decimal scores, but I'd probably give it like an 8.5, like, or maybe even closer to a 9, but it's around that range, I'd say, for me.
Yeah. I too don't like doing decimals, so I'm not going to bother, but I will give this a solid 8 out of 10. Really, really good movie. I do have some minor issues with it, but overall, good watch. Yeah. So I guess that about does it for Iron Man. Got anything else you want to say about Iron Man?
I think I got everything. I think you got a lot as well for me.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, that about does it. So thank you everyone for listening. Stay tuned. Very soon, we'll try to get an Incredible Hulk discussion going soon-ish. So until then, take care, everyone. Stay safe out there and wear a mask.